So I've had it asked before, and so now I'm finally getting to the point of being able to make that video finally. It's time that I show you how I do my binding. So because I'm at this point with the Checkmate quilt, I've cut my binding at 2.5 inch strips because I needed to cut them anyways. And so I've got my strips cut. I'm gonna connect them all together and then I'll walk you through my binding process. So the first thing I'm gonna do when it comes to my binding, I've got my separate strips and I connect mine at a 45-degree angle because I feel like it helps them lay better and looks a little bit better because you don't have those obvious seams and your bulk won't be all up against itself. So you can mark these with a pen. I'm just gonna eyeball it and go to the best of my abilities from one corner to the bottom corner. So there's that one, and then I'm gonna drop my needle. I'm gonna bring my next strip up here, get my next binding strip that's gonna attach, line them up at a 45-degree angle. So I've got one going this way. I guess these are 90s. And then I'm gonna sew on the 45. So then you're just gonna repeat that for the length of your strips. I have 6 strips, so I'm gonna keep doing that, and then I'll come back in once I have them all pressed and ready to go. So now that my binding's all made, when I did my intersections, I did press my seams open so that they lay flatter and have a little bit less bulk on each other. So those are all pressed open. I'm gonna find the bottom of my quilt, which is, so here's my bottom, and I'm gonna start on the back side, flip this over, and then I'm gonna find the end of my binding, wherever my tail end is, and then I'm gonna start and leave about 10 inches from the bottom there. So let me rotate this. Let me find my end, and okay, so here's my end, and I'm not going to start sewing right on that end there. I'm going to leave a bigger gap, but I am going to start closer to a corner because I don't want it to be right on the bottom center. So I'm going to line my binding right up with my edge, and so I've got my tail. It might not be exactly 10 inches, but it's at least a good wiggle room. And then I'm gonna get this lined right up against my presser foot. So some people do a 1/4 inch, some people do 3/8. I just line it up with the edge of my foot because that's the way that I was taught. And it does a pretty good job of giving me enough fabric when I pull it over to the front and not too short, so then I feel like my binding's hanging off the edge. So lined up, these are all lined up. Just do a little, oh, my needle came unthreaded. That's not very helpful. So we'll rethread that and try again. So thread the needle. Oh my goodness. You're getting a full tutorial on this video. So thread the needle. And this time I'm gonna hold that tail. So I'm gonna do a little forward, back stitch to kind of lock it in place. And then just as I go along, keeping that edge lined up, I'm just gonna stitch right on there. I didn't change my stitch length or anything. And so it's just whatever my machine defaulted at, which I believe is a 2.8 or 2.2. I can't remember anymore, but it does a good job. So I'm just gonna keep going. And then we'll check back in when I get to a corner. Okay, so I'm coming up on my first corner. So I'm gonna stitch up to it and stop about 1/4 inch from the edge, because then I'm gonna drop my needle, lift my foot up and rotate. So I'm gonna go stitch straight off that to create an angle right there, so. So that's what it's looking like. I've got my straight stitch, and then this is going off to that corner, because then what I'm gonna do is bring this up using that stitch to the corner as a guideline, and then bring it down. And that's gonna help make those mitered corners the best that they can be for the front. So now I'm gonna bring this, and I'm gonna start stitching not straight at the edge, but a little bit in, still lining up my foot with the edge of my fabric. So forward, backward, drop my needle down. Oops. Get that bulk off. And there we go. So I'm going to keep stitching this and then I'll come back at the next corner. So I'm here at my next corner. I've stitched up to the 1/4 inch. So again, I'm going to pivot to the 45. Stitch right up and off there. I do a little back stitch. Put that up, trim that, and then bring it up to the 45 and back down so that's nice and folded and tight right there. And then I'm going to bring this back under my presser foot, a 1/4 inch from where I feel that bulk, forward, back. And then again, so that's how I do all 4 of my corners. And then we'll be back when I'm ready to connect my 2 strips. So I've just rounded my last corner. I'm gonna stitch a little bit further down, close the gap up a little bit. Okay, so I've got maybe 6 inches between. I don't know, my estimate's not quite there. Maybe 10. So I'm gonna back stitch there, set that free. And then what I'm gonna do is flip it. I'm stuck on the cord, hold on. Flip this here so then I've got my strip there and my strip here. And what I wanna do is, obviously I don't need this much length. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut this to a decent spot. And so I'm going to lay that flat on there, and then I'm going to use this, open up, to be my guide for where I want to cut this one. So I'm opening that up so then I know I'm going to have the right size of overlap when I go to do my next diagonal. Sorry, hit my tripod. And so I'm going to bring this over, line it up there, and then I usually go back about a 1/4 inch just so I have some give and my binding isn't going to be too loose. So I'm going to cut this there. So now I've got my 2 extra pieces that I don't need anymore. And then from here, I'm going to push these out of the way, open both of these up, and bring them right sides together at that 90 degree. And then this would be helpful when if I had wonder clips or pins just to hold that in place, but right now we're gonna rough it and just finagle it through there. So I'm gonna keep that corner lined up, because then I can smooth this out as I go. So I'm gonna slide that corner under my foot. Just kind of drop my needle there, and then swerve that. So now I'm just going to sew straight down to the corner. I was really glad that my machine did not come threaded. Okay, so now cut that, cut this, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to press this open and then fold that in half. So then I'm just going to stitch right along that hole there. All right, so now I'm down to this last little bit. This is all pressed now. So now I've just got to close this gap so we can get on to the top stitching, and that'll be the last step and this quilt will be done. So I'm just gonna back up a little bit from where my stitches end so I don't have a weird gap like I accidentally did on my last quilt. A little bit, stitch, All right, so now what I'm gonna do is trim some of these crazy threads, but I'm also going to take my iron and then press my binding up and away, so then I'm gonna get less likely to catch any binding in the backside. So I'm gonna press this all the way around my quilt so it's nice and flat, so then when I go do my top stitching, it's gonna be ready to go. So everything's pressed up so that I'll be able to flip it over easily. I've adjusted my stitch length to 3.0. I didn't do so much of a good job of trimming, but I'm gonna pull this over. So at the bottom of the quilt again, pull this over. Oh, I'm gonna bump my needle to the left, which I did not do. So now I need to adjust my stitch length again. So my needle is bumped over to the left, and I'm going to line it up. It's got this little groove in my foot where this needle lines up with, so I'm keeping that where the edge of my binding is so that I can track how close it is to the edge. So I'm going back, and then here we go. Okay, so needle down. Oh, it's just getting a little funky there with its tail. Okay, so that's all I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna follow that along, pull this over. If I need to, I've got my stiletto here where I can just use that to pull over. I find myself using my fingers more sometimes because it's just, they're a little more versatile and I can feel with them versus my stiletto just being there. And so if I see any spots where I drift off, I do go back and fix that once I'm all done. Usually when I have wonder clips, I'll put a little wonder clip there so I have a physical reminder of where that spot is. So, and then that's 2 now. Usually I sew the other way on this table, but for some reason I decided to stay set up this way. So pull over, and go. And then let's get to a corner so you can see how super easy that is with the almost to the corner. Okay, so now that I'm at the corner, I'll pull this up. And then I'm going to pull that up, pull this one over so that it makes that miter, and then kind of hold things in place. I use my stiletto when I get to that, I can't get my finger in there anymore, and then pivot. Flip that over, make sure I put my foot down because I've learned that lesson. And there it goes. So I'm going to keep doing that all the way around, and then it'll be time to reveal this quilt, which at the point that this video is done, you have already seen this quilt get finished in warp speed. So I'm going to keep going, and then we'll check back in so I can give you a close-up of the binding at the end. Now that the top stitching is complete, you can see what the finished binding looks like. So here is the front side, all nice and stitched right along that edge there. And then as far as the back, because my bobbin matched, I just kept the same color thread, and it's just one nice solid stitch around the side. So that's how I do my binding. For those of you that have inquired so much over the past couple years, I finally got around to remembering to do a binding video and get it all complete and ready for you. So there you have it. And I hope that helps you make your binding in the future.